I was doing some research into the most anti-woke games this generation. I was really going to put together a top 10 anti-woke games list. I really wanted to do this because I'm really sick and tired of seeing so many people try to say that everything's woke, everything's going downhill, everything's bad, and that's far from the truth, right? The complete opposite, in fact. I've been saying this for years, but if you want to play good pure video games, you go to Nintendo consoles. But for some reason, that's really hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around. And so we have this really dedicated demographic of people who refuse to acknowledge that Nintendo has been completely woke free for over a decade, right? Well, technically since its inception, but you know what I mean, right? Even though the Western gaming world is a complete mess right now, Nintendo has put out banger after banger after banger to the point where they put out Princess Peach Showtime and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom back to back, and yet basically none of these woke grifters can do anything to gaslight you into thinking these are some like woke products because they clearly aren't. They're not following the pattern at all. But there have been a lot of really weird situations in which woke audiences have manipulated the reception of a game and completely destroyed it, completely and utterly, right? And that is also true for a lot of Nintendo exclusives. And one of the things I realized when I was putting together this top 10 list, I realized something that I don't think a lot of people have put together yet. The people who are religiously attacking Bayonetta 3 are doing so purely for woke ideological reasons, right? The real reason you see people complain about the story, the ending, the relationship between Bayonetta and Luca, you know, the Jean thing, Viola as a character, right? People are really desperately trying to frame the game as a disaster for those reasons, right? A handful of people have tried like accusing the game of being woke due to Viola's design, but those accusations fell by the wayside so quickly that like they hardly ever get brought up. And when they do, they get laughed at. The thing that does get taken seriously though, in some circles, is the idea that the series lost its identity or that they completely botched the story, that they made Bayonetta something that she wasn't, a loving wife and mother. Like it's appalling to see the complaints lobbied at Bayonetta. And today I thought we would take a look back at this series and see how this happened, right? Why have woke audiences fixated so much time and attention on Bayonetta? What exactly is the reason behind it? And why exactly are they still trying to gaslight people into thinking Bayonetta 3 was a bad game? Bayonetta is a really interesting IP because we've gotten three releases in about 15 years, right? Bayonetta 1, Bayonetta 2, and then Bayonetta 3. We also got Cereza and the Lost Demon, but that game is a spin-off and isn't discussed nearly as extensively as the other three. So extensively three games that came out during major radical shifts in the gaming culture. That's right. Bayonetta 1 came out before woke content became prevalent. Part two came out during the height of Gamergate and during the sheer gaslighting campaign issued by Game Journals, and then part three came out while all of that was winding down. Right, more and more people were lashing out at woke projects, and game journals were getting more and more defensive of their cash cow golden goose things while desperately trying to downplay everything else, right? So again, like I always talk about like the PlayStation bias when it comes to game journals because that is a real thing that exists, but there's also the ideological bias, right? You know, when these journalists are given an opportunity, they are going to express themselves through their work and through their reviews of games. And in Bayonetta's case, when the game first came out, this was during the whole sexualization of female characters is bad phase in 2009, right? You know, at that period, we had just gotten off the release of Resident Evil 5, which these people had just called racist. And we were now in this situation where every major game was being criticized for being misogynistic, right? This was like just before feminist frequency came onto the scene, and so Bayonetta was slammed. Mario was slammed because he rescues Princess Peach, right? Zelda was seen as like not a very interesting character. So like this was the beginning of game journals applying feminist theory to game critiques, right? And so initially, Bayonetta came out and was really apprehensively covered by gaming journalists. A lot of them came out and said it was a good game, but they did not like the sexualization of the female lead, right? But at the time, this was when Japanese culture was a bit more widely accepted, right? So people were used to kind of crazy stuff like this, and they knew if they got too vocal about it, it would kind of expose them as just being like appropriate, being overly critical of their culture. So they weren't really able to do a lot with Bayonetta 1's release, right? It was mostly like a pre-release thing, from what I could see, is that game journals made their concerns known. They talked about it, and Platinum just laughed at them and just did what they were going to do anyway, which is how this should work in general, right? You should not allow Westerners to dictate what you should do with your video game. And this incident really should be an indication of just how radically things have changed over the past 15 years. Where now, like, these people have gotten jobs at Square Enix and are now trying to censor Dragon Quest art, but back then, um, game journals would complain. They would try and make things an issue, but it wouldn't go anywhere and it would be completely forgotten. And this is an example of how Marxists behave when they take it out, right? Because every time this happens, every time like something they rally against ends up being successful, they have to do this really weird thing where they have to backpedal and try to say that like the thing they were critical of is actually super based. Right. Well, I mean, super in line with their ideology, I should say. So, like the opposite of based. um, when Bayonetta became successful and became regarded as like the greatest action game of all time, way better than Slap, like Devil May Cry 3 or anything else that's ever been released, right? Game journals had to backpedal and had tried to portray the game as like some feminist power symbol, right? So in the 5 years in between Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2, we saw this culture shift where we went from condemning Bayonetta's sexuality to like praising it and enabling it and just utilizing the trying to utilize the character as a feminist icon and a power symbol and their girl essentially trying to co-opt the character for their purposes, right? And you see this behavior a lot in the gaming sphere, but never more blatantly with Bayonetta, right? It's just one of those brazen open things about this, right? So this is actually why Bayonetta 2 had such a high was so well received among critics, right? Because it had gotten this reputation due to like the movie Bob's coverage of it and stuff like that because of the culture shift. Game journals, and because like people were so salty about it being Nintendo exclusive, like game journals sensed an opportunity to latch onto it and adopt Bayonetta as like one of their queer icons, right? A thing that would grow and escalate over the 8-year period that Bayonetta 3 was in development. So in between the releases between 2 and 3, somehow Bayonetta went from being the most amazing character ever to being some like carpet munching feminist power fantasy, right? So instead of being a character designed for gamers, right? A lead character in a really well received video game franchise, it became some like gay thing, right? And that was a very prevalent thing in online circles where people genuinely somehow gaslit themselves into thinking that Bayonetta and Jean were in a lesbian relationship. And it got pretty bad. Okay, like I'll tell you that there were a lot of these people like making up interviews with Hideki Kamiya and some other Platinum talent. There were like all these weird statements about how Shimazaki liked the idea. J.P. Kellums came out and said he wanted it to happen. Right? There were all these like stories about how it was totally canon, and then Bayonetta 3 came out and like shit all over that in honestly the most spectacular way possible. Not only is Bayonetta straight, she is with her love interest Luca, who is a man, in every single multiverse in existence. So you can't just do this thing where like, well, in the real universe, Bayonetta and Jean are totally having lesbian babies using Umbran black magic. It's not gonna happen. Okay, it was never a thing. It was not a thing. It was just some like fan fiction nonsense. But a lot of game journals became enthusiastic about the IP because of this woke fantasy, right? This woke fan fiction. And that's why so many people in the YouTube gaming sphere, including like I believe the Super Best Friend guys and that man, Susie Hunter. What's his real name? I don't remember. The Troon like action game reviewer. Uh, a lot of these people came out and like expressed how upset they were that Bayonetta gets dick down and has a daughter. Even though like those of us who were actual fans like called it right from the onset, it was kind of obvious going by what the way things were going. But the real reason you see so many people complaining about the ending and what the and what the implications are is because it specifically contradicted like their narrative regarding the IP and the character, right? Like this Bayonetta in a way completely goes against all of their core beliefs, right? The idea that women should not have children, the idea that women should disrespect men, the idea that like men and women are not compatible together, that like nobody is happy in a heterosexual relationship. Having kids for these people is something that's really demonized and like hated on. And this isn't something they openly talk about, but it's really obvious if you spend enough time around them at all. Like, they cannot stand the fact that Bayonetta actually likes cock, right? That she actually took Luca and made a baby with him, using white magic. Okay? Like, it's the fact that this happened goes against everything that they wanted the series to be. And as a result of that, they lashed out to the point where there were people at the Game Award show that year when Cereza and the Lost Demon was. When the trailer for that was first shown off, there were people like booing. You could hear people in the crowd going like, boo, boo. Like, you go back and watch it if you see. And you saw a lot of people in the YouTube sphere like spurging out about this because they really wanted the IP to die immediately after that happened, right? They really did not like that at all. And this is why. Again, their love for Bayonetta had nothing to do with the actual core game or the developers or the talent behind it or what the game actually is. No, their love for it came from the fact that they really thought they could use this game to push forward their agenda. That's all it amounted to. And in the end, it completely blew up in their face. And they took a massive L. The thing that they were building up to for 15 years completely collapsed in and around itself, right? It is laughable how all of this ended. And I think this is a really positive like example of what's going to happen to woke culture like long term, because it couldn't be more obvious that nobody likes these people, nobody appreciates them, nobody thinks they offer anything of value to the industry or to the community or to gaming, right? Like, these people are just parasites trying to like shove their nonsense where it doesn't belong, right? And when they do get BTFO, when it does inevitably happen, people like me maybe make one YouTube video just laughing at them, and then we move on, right? We move on to the next game and celebrate what that game actually was. Like, outside of a core group of individuals actively pushing the message Nobody really cares about this at all. And this is why it is never, ever going to become mainstream. People describe transgenderism as being mainstream, but it's not. You know, people describe this kind of online activism as being normalized. It isn't, right? Again, like we're seeing a repeat of what happened with the hippie movement, right? Where the entire thing will just kind of collapse and people will just make fun of them forever because of what stereotypes they ended up making themselves be. Like, this is the current state of gaming, right? Is that not only is gaming better than ever, like all of the bad actors, you know, the PlayStations, the game journos, right, the developers, the EAs, right, the Activisions, right, all of them are starting to fall off, and we are on the verge of, I think, a new golden age of gaming. And it is going to be absolutely glorious.